It's exam time here in Australia, and I've got some last minute exam tips for you guys to set you up for a win. Welcome to my channel about med school, medicine and being a doctor in Australia. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, and if we've already met, I'm so happy you're back. If the clock is ticking for you on your exams, or your exam is even today, hopefully this video will help you out by sharing with you a few little things that I would have really liked to have known before I went into my exams. I know it's grind time for you guys right now, whether you're in grade 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you're in tertiary studies, or you're with me in med school. While I'm about to give you some clean, practical tips on how to get through these exams, first I want to talk a little bit on something that is really quite a struggle this time of the year for most of us when we're absolutely exhausted, and that's motivation. I don't know about you guys, but I've sure had my ups and downs with motivation through what seems like relentless, endless study at sometimes. But you know what? I think sometimes we can be our worst enemy when it comes to cultivating motivation. And that's because I think one of the things that inspires motivation the most is progress. And often we choose to ignore our progress. Hello sun. When the sun goes away, when we've got a lot on our plate, we're very quick to look forwards at what we've got left to do. We sit here and we think, oh my gosh, these are all the things I don't know, and these are all the things I need to get done before I go and sit my exam. That stuff can leave you feeling overwhelmed, defeated, and squash your motivation so quickly. But if you're lacking motivation, sometimes the best thing that you can do is instead look the other way. Have a look back and see all the things you've done so far. Look at where you are now compared to where you are at the start of the semester. Look at where you are now compared to where you were last week. You have made so much progress, and that's the name of the game. You're never going to be perfect. No one's going to be perfect walking into their exam. All you need to do is constantly be making progress in the right direction. So do me a favor, pat yourself on the back, let's celebrate how far you've come, and let's get on with tidying up some of those loose ends with some practical last minute exam tips. I've got some tips around 3 different points around your exam. Number 1, before you leave home. 2, when you get to the exam center. And 3, during your exam. And guys, if any of these don't suit you, no worries. Do what works for you. I love that you have something that already works for you. Go with that. Alright, first section, before you leave home. This is the practical stuff, the basics, but the necessities. Parking. Consider that because it's exam day, parking might be really bad. If you need to, or you want to drive yourself, have a think about whether it's worth going a bit early so that you can make sure you get a park, or so that you can park far away but still have time to wander yourself into the exams. Don't cut yourself short on exam time. Clothing. If you've never been to the exam center before, try and ask someone around you if the exam center is particularly hot or cold. There is nothing worse than doing an exam when you're absolutely freezing. If you're not sure, just have a few layers to swap in and out as you need. 2 pens, please, my friends. I don't want to see any of you guys disadvantaged just because your pen ran out of ink. By the same token, if you've got some multiple choice questions to color in, don't forget to bring a pencil and an eraser, because then you can change your answers that you need to. And don't forget to bring the all-important student ID if you're at tertiary study or if your institution requires it. For all of these things, it's a good idea to get them out the night before and put them right at the door so you won't forget them as you're walking out. My last tip in this section, phone. I think it's best wherever you can to not bring your phone. Unless you've got a locker at school or you can leave your phone in your car or with a friend, I would generally try and not bring your phone to the exam. Firstly, you don't want to get stuck with having it in your pocket and forgetting to take it out before you start the exam. That's the kind of thing that can get you disqualified at no questions asked from your exam. Worth it? Let me work it. In previous years, they've let us put our phone face down next to our desk on the floor. But in my last exam, they didn't tell us before the exam that suddenly that rule had been wiped. So now we had to all leave our phones in a squash court outside and away from the exam room with no security. Heaps of people wandering past this open room, and you just had to try and forget that your phone was there for anyone to pick up. So it was really hard to not be constantly thinking about my phone during the exam. To avoid all of this, much easier to just leave it at home. And if you didn't drive yourself, just prearrange a time that you can get picked up. Right, now we're in the exam center. If you don't have a watch, sit yourself where you can see the clock. Time management is everything in your exams. Speaking of time management, when I was doing my year 12 biology exams, my mum gave me this tip, and that was to, before the exam, distribute up the time that you have for your exam according into how many points there are per question. So 2 important things I think for this point. Number 1, this plan should be in time in terms of what the clock is going to say. Because unless you actually have a stopwatch to look at, the clock is going to say a time, not time elapsed. It's just easier if you don't have to do that extra calculation. The second thing that I think is important is that you plan in some time at the end to look over your exams or go back to questions that were higher for you in terms of gaining some more marks. Maybe these were questions that you didn't quite finish but you thought you better move on from because you'd already used up too much time in that question. Or it was a question that you were potentially struggling with but you thought if you had some more time you could probably work it out. For an example of a time plan, say we've got 120 marks for a 2-hour exam and we've got 10 minutes reading time. The exam starts at 8:30. I don't know about you guys, but we can usually write in our reading time. So for our 2-hour exam with our 10 minutes reading time, we now have 130 minutes to work with. I'm gonna say I want 20 minutes at the end to go back over my exam and go for any of those high yield areas. Now I'm left with 110 minutes to distribute my time over my marks and questions. With 110 minutes, I then want to get half of the exam done in 55 minutes. So if our start time's 8:30, I want to get through 60 questions worth of marks by 9:25. Half that time again, because I probably want to know how I'm doing a bit earlier than halfway through the exam, we've got 27 and a half minutes worth of time, which is a little bit ugly for a number. I know that if I want to be working on time, in half an hour I need to be past 30 marks worth of questions. Getting me? At 9 o'clock I know I need to be past 30 marks worth of questions. If not, I know I need to speed up. 9:25, I want 60 questions done. 9:55 and I should be past 90 questions or marks. And by 10:20 I want to be finished the exam so that I have my 20 minutes to go back and get some more marks. I'd write these time points down on my paper first things so that I don't have to think about it again, and I know I've got my time management structure to make sure I'm going to get to attempt every question on this paper. Those numbers can be confusing to work out during the exam. I recommend doing this work beforehand and setting yourself up really well to get the best chance at attempting all the questions. Speaking of writing things down in reading time, my next tip is about the first things that go on your paper. In addition to those times, so that happens to help you, any other concepts, equations, quotes that you're trying to hold in your head for the exam that either you're just finding difficult to remember or that you make a mistake on frequently, get that out of your head and write it down straight away on your paper the moment you're allowed to write. This way you don't have to try and hold it in your head, it's not taking up any of your brain space, and you can save your working memory for working out the question in front of you, and then you still have that information if and when the question related to that comes up. Alright, bell's gone, it's exam time. My first tip for during your exam would be answer the questions that you know first. If they're MCQs or 1-mark questions, I would just go ahead and go through all the questions in order. But if we're talking about short answer questions or long answer questions, 5-10 marks or more, unlock in some points for the topics that you know. My next tip is about the questions that you don't really know well. My advice here is just to write something down. Even if you know nothing, sometimes you can just reword the question a little bit and you can get half a mark. Sometimes that's going to add up to a significant mark for you. In any case, have a go, write something, you might just be right. My next point goes with my last few points, and that is know when to quit. It's really easy, particularly if you're a very determined person, to actually get bogged down in a question and spend way too long on it when either it's a question that you don't know really well and so you're just trying really hard to find some information to get the point, or it's a question that you might know really well and you just want to throw out every piece of information you know that's relevant to it. And that plan that we talked about with the times just before will tell you when it's really a good idea to move on. My next tip might be somewhat of a personal preference. It is to, if you have a split exam of multiple choice or extended matching questions and short answer or long answer questions, i.e. questions where you have to write versus questions where you have to pick a letter, no matter what order my book is in, I actually flip and do the writing questions first. For me, they take a lot more energy. I find trying to pull the information out of my brain from nowhere much more taxing than the recognition process that happens in a multiple choice question where all the words and the right answer is there. So I like to do the really taxing stuff first and then step down to the easier stuff when I'm running out of gas. On MCQs and EMQs, I think it's a really good idea to, every so often, for me, I do it every 10 questions, line up and check that my number of question that I'm colouring in on the sheet is actually lining up with what I'm colouring in. It's very easy with these small compressed sheets of lots of numbers and letters to accidentally go one line too deep and suddenly be colouring in an answer for a different question than what you intended. So perhaps circle every 10th question on your answer sheet as a reminder to check in that you're still colouring in on the right line. You can imagine that if one letter is off, it might just shift all the answers for all your questions thereafter, and suddenly you've answered differently for every other question than you intended. My next tip is don't be afraid to ask for help in the exam. If you found that you've done that, for example, or you don't have an eraser to fix your problem, if a question doesn't seem to make sense to you and you think it might actually be wrong, don't be afraid to put your hand up and ask for help. The people in the exam center are there to enforce the rules, but they're also there to help you if you have a technical difficulty. So don't suffer for no reason. In the worst case scenario, they'll say, no, I'm sorry, that's something that we can't answer. My next tip is, as you're going through your exam, give the questions a really big circle that you want to come back to and do more work on in that block of time that you're reserving for the end. Then you can be really strategic in how you spend that time, instead of just being like, well, I've got 20 minutes and I need to review this whole paper. Or was that question that I was finding really hard, I can't remember, trying to race through and flip through the pages. Sadly, a very common error for us as students is to read the question wrong, and it really sucks when this happens to you. Something that I found is a really easy way to make a mistake is to not notice the negative in the question. Sometimes the question will be phrased as something like, what is not part of this group? Or what does not do this function? Then even if you read the question perfectly, when you go on and read all these right answers, it's really easy to read it like, oh yes, that's the correct sentence, that does that function, yes, that's right. But in fact, it's asking you what doesn't do the function. Something that really helped me with this is just to do a big circle or a big dramatic underline of the negative in the question. Then when you glance back at it, it's hard to miss it. My next tip is in knowing that it can be really off-putting when other students are getting up in the middle or even towards the end of the exam and leaving. I want you to do your best to not let this affect you. You don't know if they've left the exam early because they found it really easy and they just flew through it, or because they found it too hard and they've given up to a certain degree. You need to run your own race. Thinking about what other people are doing isn't going to do you any favors. It's easier said than done, I know. If you think you can't flip your mindset about that, it might be a good idea to sit yourself at the front with your back to all the people behind you. That way it'll be less easy for you to see people out of the corner of your eye jumping up and leaving. My last tip doesn't really go in any of those three sections, it goes across all of them. And this tip is really about self-compassion and kindness. When you show up for this exam, when you're in your last minute, on the day of your exam, even the day before your exam, all of the hard work is done. All the study you've done, all the semester that you've been through, all you're doing in your exam is demonstrating all that hard work that you've been doing. We should be celebrating in this time. Look at where you are. To be able to sit the exam is an amazing achievement, just to be in that position. I can understand the temptation to be hard on yourself and how it can really feel like that's really going to motivate you. But in my opinion, we'll all have a much better working memory capacity that is making decisions and thinking clearly without the self-doubt and deprecation. So congratulations on being in a place where you can sit your exams. You've done so great. All of my luck out to you guys, and I'll see you in my next video.